effectively to teach history. And dotted lines, so you can cut those out. And then you just take these timelines and you tape them together. And all you got to do is start cutting them out to have images to put up on a timeline. When we fully can comprehend the scope of history in its entirety, it really helps us to begin to identify better when we take something new and put it into place. I took the timeline, the pack, a new pack that's coming, that goes along with America's Story 1. What we're doing with the timeline is we're creating this completed picture. It's really almost like a visual scrapbook. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thursday afternoon. Hope this is a good time. Hope you're having a fantastic week. Hey, today for teaching tips, what I'd like to talk about is timelines and using a timeline effectively to teach history. We have some new things coming in the catalog. In fact, I just got my copy of the catalog today, which means catalogs are getting ready to ship to your houses, which is awesome. And you'll notice under America's Story and World Story, there's some timeline packs. So if you are using America's Story, like America's Story 1, that's the timeline that I'm going to use today. What we did was we created a separate timeline just to make things easier. There's the strip comes looking about like this, and dotted lines, so you can cut those out. And then you just take these timelines and you tape them together and find a wall like this and just put them on the wall from the lowest, like in this one it's 1490 up to, I've got it up to 1805. So the span of about 300 years of history is what we're talking about today. And then what we did in this timeline is we said, we'll make it real easy for everybody. There's already pictures in the book. Rather than having to cut your books apart, what we'll do is we'll take the pictures. So in chapter, like say chapter 3, Christopher Columbus and the European explorers, we have images from chapter 3 and those times. And all you got to do is start cutting them out to have images to put up on a timeline. So it makes it real easy to work with the books, America's Story 1 and 2, 3, and World Story. So what I did is I took that timeline and I put it together, I cut it out, I taped it together, and I taped it to this wall. And as we go through history, so many times we look at a history book and we're piecemealing history. We're studying a little American history, we're studying a little ancient history, we're studying a little, medieval history, and different people throughout that time period, but we're not actually putting the context together the same for a student. They don't understand the context. Oh, I'm sorry. So they don't understand the context of being able to have a visitor. That's funny. I think Aubrey sent him in. The context of being able to understand that history is like a tapestry. It's all interwoven and built upon each other. And when we fully can comprehend the scope of history in its entirety, it really helps us to begin to identify better when we take something new and put it into place. So let's just go through an exercise. Brittany is running camera today behind me. So is anybody watching, Brett?
Yeah, we've got about 50 people in the app, or in the Facebook Live, and then 36 in the app.
Awesome.
Samantha would like to know what book this is from.
Well, this is from America's Story. So what I've done is I took the timeline, the pack, a new pack that's coming, that goes along with America's Story 1, and I'm going to do this. But you could do this with anything. You can take any time period in history. You could do it from, creation all the way to present day. If you have a wall or a space. Now you could also use like a piece of butcher paper where you open up like a piece of paper on the floor and put the timeline, tape it to that tape any of the information to that, and then when you're done, just fold it up or roll it up, and every time you use it, just roll it out. So that would work as well. This is very easy because if you have a wall throughout the course of the school year, you could build the timeline, you could build on it, and then take a picture of it. You have it to save. You could even print it out, and then start again the next year. Or you could put the timelines, like the early timeline up, the next timeline, and another timeline. So you could have like all three timelines for like America's history spread out like this. So as we go through history, forgive my voice and the fun we're having with having a cold this week. So the beginning of this course, Columbus spots land October 12th, 1492. And if you can see, here's just an image from the book. We put a date to it, and all you would simply do on this timeline is tape it somewhere approximately about 1492. And so we have 1492, we have Columbus. Okay, so from the time of Columbus, and we keep studying, and we come across another time period, the Pilgrims create the Mayflower Compact. Now, it's surprising to me how much time is between Columbus and the Pilgrims. But when you study history, you don't often see that unless you have a visual representation. So 1620, we're going to come here for the Pilgrims creating the Mayflower Compact. So that's the span of 130 years from the time Columbus sees America or sees land to the time that the Pilgrims are writing the Mayflower Compact. What about the Boston Tea Party? 1773 is the Boston Tea Party. And so we take one of the pictures, we put 17, and you just approximate, here's 1773, we have the Boston Tea Party. So again, we have like 300 years of history that we're talking about. And you see how easy it is to just think, well, Columbus, the Pilgrims, and the Boston Tea Party. That's all fairly early American history. But when you look at over a 300-year period, is that right, 300 years? 1500 to 1800, yeah, okay. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence, 1776. Okay, now, so we got 1776, Boston Tea Party, Declaration of Independence. What about a character in history like Daniel Boone? Here's a man of the wild frontier. What does that even mean to most kids? Where, you know, what's the difference between Columbus, the Pilgrims, or Daniel Boone? Well, Daniel Boone's time period, he was about, we'll just say, he was born 1734, 1755 AD, he fought in the French and Indian War. So he actually was familiar with a lot of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So if we put him, I mean, here's a guy who at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, let's see, he was about 40 years old, give or take. So we have Daniel Boone, and we're going to just put him in this time period as well. Okay, so now we have a context. 1492 Columbus, move forward almost 125, 130 years. We have the Pilgrims and creating the Mayflower Compact, come forward to the Boston Tea Party and Daniel Boone and the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so that's from the book. As we're studying different characters in the book, that we now have some context. But let's say as a family, we are also, you know, the internet is awesome because I can go to one of the browsers, do an image search, and type something in. So let's say that we're just interested in understanding what was the period of Enlightenment, what about the Renaissance? Again, so easy to go and just see the Renaissance, period of European history, marking the transition from the Middle Ages to modernity, covering the 15th, 16th centuries. So you're about a time period of 1300 to 1600. So if you have a wall like this, it'd be pretty easy, 1300 to 1600, to say, okay, this time period was the Renaissance. The Age of Enlightenment was an intellectual, philosophical movement dominated the world of ideas in Europe during the 17th and 19th century. The Enlightenment emerged out of European intellectual scholarly movement known as the Renaissance humanism. Philosophers like Voltaire, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, these men were 1715 to 1789, right in the time of American Revolution and thought that was coming from there. Okay, so we have the Age of Enlightenment, 1715 to 1789. And now we have context continuing to expand. Questions or comments?
Nah.
Good.
Yeah, I'm trying to read through the tablet. It's kind of hard to see the way we've got it set up, but we're good.
Okay. So then we have a little bit of an understanding. We're starting to see more of it in history. What about bicycles? When were bicycles invented? Well, the bicycles were the early 1800s, and it was something called a hobby horse. If you can see, it was kind of a bit archaic, but you would run it. You didn't have pedals, but that was the early bicycles. That would have been, in this time period, would have been an invention. So technology, you could start doing that. One of my favorites, and I'll explain this in a minute, one of my favorites is the toilet. So, you have to understand, what would have toilets have been like in the 1400s, at the time that Columbus is seeing land in 1492? What would have been the experience of using the restroom or the loo? Well, on the side of a castle, I don't know if you can see, on the side of a castle, they would actually build these little outcroppings that would stick out from the castle, and they'd put a board over it. And the royalty or whoever was in the castle would come and use that, and it would just go down the side of the building, outside the building. Then they would actually use these as closets. They called them garderobes. Because of the smell, it would keep the moths out, the moths that would eat. So there's a little here with an article that we found that's interesting. If you didn't have a castle, you basically could put a hole in the ground. See the hole in the ground? With a board in a hole. See it? That would have been your modern restroom in the 1400s if you were needing to use the restroom. Well, we don't often think of that as we go through history, but I do believe that when we go through history and we see things like that, we begin to have an appreciation for what we have and how far we've come. By 1776, they had actually developed running water, and they had a flush toilet. That would have been the patent design of a flush toilet from the 1776, 1775. That's actually a patent illustration on that. And so we put the technology for what a flush toilet would have been in about 1775. What about art? Say we wanted to know something about the art. Well, let's see. Michelangelo would have been one of the painters during the time of the Renaissance, and so here's a picture that we have that's fairly well known, but it did need a fig leaf to give a little bit of protection. So we put that for art, and we have some art that's here. Another well-known photograph that students will see, when did it come? The Mona Lisa. Well, the Mona Lisa's, we're looking at about 1500. So we have the Mona Lisa. Now you see how there's a visual representation of history kind of beginning to develop? So we have an understanding now when we envision the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa's way down here with the time of Columbus and the discovery of America. And then as we move forward, we have the paintings and the art had changed. So this is, the artist was Gilbert Stuart. The name of the painting is called The Skater. Now, here's what's interesting about this picture. Do you see how he's like skating? There's actually, he's ice skating. We pick on the Instagram generation right now for staging their photos, this would be perfect on Instagram. See how he's sitting crossed with this little thing? Isn't that funny? I mean, this is back in 1782, a painting from 1782 with the skater posing for his Instagramming. Sorry.
You okay?
That's so funny. I guess we can act like that now that we have flush toilets. So we're going 1782. Here we go. We have the skater here. Now, as we're going through history, there's all kinds of things that we could be building on this wall. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be a work of art. It's just discoveries and putting it in context. What are the... I'll do one more. One more. Let's talk about clothing. What would people have dressed like in the early or late 1400s? This would have been a representation of their dress. The men literally wore robes and a lot of flowing type clothing would have been represented in 1400s. So it's interesting. And so we put that to represent the dress. Ugh. What about dress later in the around the time of Daniel Boone and the Declaration of Independence? Well, men were beginning to wear pants and longer coats, and ladies' dresses were more fitting, and the scoots kind of scooted out a little bit, and so this would be what the dress would be like. So now we have context of what the dress would be about the time of the signing of Declaration of Independence. So we have this history going on, and in just a short amount of time, I've painted for you 300 years of history that would be really easy for a student to get an idea of, wow, at the time that Columbus is sailing, this is what Columbus would have, what would have been going on in the world during Columbus's time. Now you could also do, you could add other things. Like you could add major events or wars, plagues, inventions, what your student's interested in. And as you go through time, there's going to be things that pop up, like if they're interested in baseball, and we've moved into, say, you know, the next time period in American history. You could actually put you know, when was basketball invented and where? When was baseball invented? Different components that just help a student put things in context. When I was teaching Bible as a pastor, this is one of the things that really helped for me, was taking the Bible and creating a timeline and really beginning to build into that timeline people like, you know, understanding that God made a promise to Abraham. Abraham had left his land, and then God gives him basically the promised land. Now, today, that affects today. That's why there's a battle going on today over Israel. But when we understand the context of the time, how everything unfolded, how the nation Israel and the tribes of Israel came to be, how it separated, the exile, and then God's amazing return of the Jewish people back to Israel. And that's all recent, but you take something like that and you begin to put it in a timeline, all of a sudden it starts to really begin to click and make sense. For right brain learners, if you're used to the flashcards for math lessons, it's a little different because it's right brain learning, right? Well, the thing about the right brain learning is what it does is it's a completed picture. So rather than an open picture or kind of piecemealing history, what we're doing with the timeline is we're creating this completed picture. So if you've been watching, I've explained that at the time of Columbus, the clothing, what the toilets looked like, what some of the art looks like. So if you kind of close your eyes and envision what that side of the timeline, I know it's a little hard to see it here, but you have a completed picture of what the world was like at the time of Columbus. So it's not just this random fact of Columbus going and exploring new land. There's more to it. You begin to understand the people who lived during that time, what the art looked like. You could do what homes look like, architecture. There's so many things you could do based on what your family's interested in. If your husband is a contractor and they like building, do architecture and look at different construction. What were the tools like at those times? And just go and do image search. Tools from the 1400s and see what you discover. I spent some time today just picking these two time periods to contrast to show how to use a timeline. This is one way to do a timeline, but I think it's the easiest because you're able, if you can put up a wall or grab a big piece of paper or use a garage or something like that, where you're able to build a timeline like this. And every time you learn something new in history, in that time period, just go and put it up. Now you could also draw pictures. You could put notes, like you could do sticky notes as well when you find a fact or a quote or something like that. You could be as creative as you want. It's really almost like a visual scrapbook of history.
Tabitha asked if you could share what the time increments are on the timeline on the wall.
These are 5 years, so it's every 5 years. You could you could do it differently. You could do every 10 years, or it kind of depends on how much history you wanted to keep track of. So I broke these all down into 5-year increments, because with something like this, as you're going through a year and you're studying, you may want to do quite a bit more. You know, this wall could become very complete with print-offs and discussions and depth.
Cool.
Is it? Okay. With part of the purchase of Knowledge Quest, one of the things that we have is the Wonders of Old book. The Wonders of Old book is basically a timeline book that you have where it just goes through, and it's like this, and you could put pictures and tape things here. You could write notes, anything like that, and then it has let's see. So we have the timeline of the New World, and there's some dates to kind of give you some benchmarks as well. So you could do this, and then every time you go to do history, pull this out and be building the timeline that way. That's a preference issue. I kind of like seeing it like this graphically, but this is a lot easier if you don't have the space to tape a 10-foot timeline up. One other thing that I'll talk about is elementary world history U-report. This has a timeline in it. The timeline opens up to about 15 foot. You could actually, as you do this, you could grab a timeline like this and begin sticking notes and drawings and stuff like that into it as well. But what this course does is in upper elementary, it's really designed to give you an overview of history. It teaches you how to build a timeline. So it starts right out with building your own timeline, you know, because we have to understand our roots, right? So in a timeline for myself, here's when I was born, and here's when I graduated high school, here's when I got married, here's when I had each of my children. Now each of my children have a timeline, and they're able to actually look back and see where in my life they came into being, and understanding, like, okay, we can build timelines for many things which help give us context. When was Grandpa and Grandma born? When did they get married? You know, and suddenly you begin having a much more comprehensive understanding of the topic rather than just piecemealing. When I say Grandpa and Grandma got married, what does that really even mean? What does that date look like? But something as simple as that, where we could actually look at what was the clothing, what was going on in the world, what were the inventions that occurred that year. You see how easy it would be to kind of teach them to look at history more as a tapestry and interwoven. And the more you do this, like evangelist or world events, you begin to see how God's hand was in throughout all of history, and how he wove his purposes through history, and how the gospel of Jesus Christ continues to move through this tapestry of history, and how his purposes are being accomplished. So, kind of a brief on how to use timelines. Don't get hung up on on it being perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just is a representation. Once you got the picture, and I can go, okay, Enlightenment here, Renaissance there, Declaration of Independence, unrest, flush toilets. Thank goodness for that. Because that hole in the wall with a plank thing, can't even imagine. Okay, and then at this end we have you know, what they were wearing and all of that, and then that helps put in context. But here's what else is cool. So now we're watching a movie, and we begin to see something from the time of the Renaissance and Columbus and their dress. All of a sudden I recognize, hey, that's what they were wearing more during that time period than what they were wearing during this time period. You see, we've actually now given them context. And I think one of the strongest points for Master Books is our applied learning, where it's really taking knowledge but putting it in context so that it's useful, not just random facts and figures that a student can't put in context. So, any other questions? No? Good. All right, well, hopefully this was helpful. And these timelines, you'll probably be seeing them within the next couple of weeks. That'll be going online with America's Story. I think Felicia's done with those, and they'll be available as a download. And I believe we're also going to do some physical, but real simple. And they go along with the books, but you could easily do this on your own too. Create a timeline strip, put it out, and then just begin collecting pictures and facts and figures and things like that to put on timeline. All right. Hopefully that's helpful. Hey guys, have a blessed weekend. The weather here is mighty cold, but I know spring is coming, and if we can encourage you just to hold on. Spring is coming. The end of this school year is going to wrap up. We're getting ready for the Nashville show. I've got a booth set up in the warehouse, and we've got signs being printed, and the trailers are all getting made ready to go to the show. So we're getting ready for convention season, which we're looking forward to seeing a lot of you at the shows, and it's going to be a fun year. So, and your catalog's mailing, so expect to see that pretty soon too. All right, guys, God bless you. Have a good weekend.